You're listening to Can I Get a Retake, where education meets innovation.
Our guest today is Dr. Tracey Ward, a professor of medicinal chemistry and medical biochemistry at Ferris State University. Dr. Ward brings both rigorous scientific expertise and a commitment to natural medicine and rethinking our reliance on pharmaceuticals. She is also the author of Medical Biochemistry and Drug Interaction Basics, published with Great River Learning. I'm personally interested in a lot of what you're doing in terms of your research and what you're working on in that way. And just in general, what brought you to where you are now?
I have a myriad of different backgrounds that led me, I guess, to where I am today. I pursued a degree in chemistry and biology in undergrad, and then obviously I have my doctorate in medicinal chemistry. A lot of people, are like, well, what's medicinal chemistry? They're not as familiar with it. And I said, well, it's kind of like a blend with pharmacology and organic chemistry together. And so I have been teaching in a PharmD curriculum for the last 24 years for pharmacy students. So they need to understand, basically, what a receptor site is and, how drugs look the way they do and how they bind and how they elicit their pharmacologic response. So things along that nature. So medicinal chemists end up showing up in academia in a variety of programs, but some of them are like doctor of pharmacies or, even medical schools programs.
For those of us outside of the field, the journey of a drug is almost invisible. It just, shows up and we see it in the TV commercials. Can you walk us through what it actually takes to go from an idea of something that ends up on the pharmacy shelf?
So it depends on what kind of drug it is. So like, for example, if we kind of reverse and go back to the mid 40s, if you will, there were some of the earliest drugs came from natural sources and natural products, and that's still the case today. So when, the reason that a lot of students and maybe people as a whole don't hear about this is because there's not money in natural medicine. There's money in pharmaceutical-based treatments, and that's a whole nother conversation. But what I'm saying is when you identify a lead from nature, you can't patent that structure. So what usually happens is medicinal chemists will tweak the active structure to get something that you can patent and have something to move forward with. But as far as identifying a lead or coming up with an idea and getting to the pharmacy shelves, the word research is talked a lot about in a lot of different forums, and people think it's really attractive, but few people realize how frustrating and time consuming true research really is. I mean, you could take 12 to 15 years very easily to go from an idea to get something potentially that could help a patient, unless you collaborate and get your drug candidate fast tracked through the FDA process, which is a growing trend, but it's also comes with a lot of concerns nationwide from a lot of medical professionals, because some of the safety is being is being decreased as a consequence. But there's so much pressure with pharmaceutical chemistry to get things to market fast because they only have so many years patent protection before drugs go generic.
Yes, it's not an overnight process.
Oh,
And
no.
I,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the general public kind of takes for granted how long it really does take to get it from one idea all the way into something that is being utilized.
Yeah, I mean, not only do you have to go through all the cell tests and show efficacy, safety, dosage, pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, but then you have to go through multiple layers of animal models before you even can get and apply for human studies. And then there's multiple levels of human studies before you can actually even, it's not it's definitely not an overnight deal. And most of the drug candidates that enter into what we say preclinical development. Every stage goes down and down. I mean, the cost to bring a drug and the success to get one is like finding a needle in the haystack, but it could cost you 1.5 to $2 billion. So, even if you are a faculty member in academia that discovers a lead, you have to have collaborators and ultimately, a pharmaceutical collaborator to kind of progress this forward because the costs are just ginormous.
You do hold patents in your research.
Yeah, I do.
So, what does that actually protect, and how do you apply that? How do you find that partner to move things forward?
So most faculty, they, through a myriad of networking events, conferences, just normal workings, you can meet certain people that may study similar things like you, and you gain a rapport and you find potential collaborations. So, for example, I'm a good medicinal chemist, but I'm not the one that does the cell testing. And you want more of a pharmacologist that's going to be specialized in that. And those cells are very sensitive. Some of these cells, I mean, they can all die overnight. And so, I mean, there's a lot of obstacles you have to overcome when you test these things, but you can't have one person that does it all. It doesn't exist because everyone has their different strengths and weaknesses, and it takes a team, or it takes a village, if you will, in order to make an idea and a project continue to progress so that one day maybe it will reach the shelves of being able to help people.
So, along those lines, what is, I guess, the sweet spot? At what point does a promising compound move from just the modeling into an actual lab?
Yeah, so it depends on the efficacy. So, for example, a lot of my expertise in the pharmaceutical field is, I have a lot of research years ago with cancer and diabetes, but probably within the last 15 years, most of my expertise is with fatty liver disease, which is a growing problem in this country and worldwide. With the widespread use of fructose, a lot of people think, oh, you just kill your liver with alcohol. Oh, no, fructose will damage your liver far greater than even alcohol. I'm not giving alcohol the hall pass, certainly not. But I mean, it's like, fructose is in 80% of the things in the grocery store, and it's really killing your liver. And then Alzheimer's. I'm an expert in Alzheimer's. So those are where most of my patents are.
In reading some of your not your actual papers, but some of the news covering that's been on your research, it says that you take a different approach to some of the different existing treatments when it comes to Alzheimer's. Without getting too deep into the chemistry, can you tell us more about this shift in how you're thinking about the disease?
So, I look at things more from, a functional medicine standpoint. Your body is designed to work as a whole, so not a reductionistic standpoint. So, for example, a lot of your allopathic programs of medicine really have a reductionistic mindset. So, for example, if your heart hurts, they only look at the heart. Well, it might not be the heart. It could be, your lower abdomen, other things that are, consequently leading to that. And so you have to look at it from a whole body perspective. And I tell my students all the time, your body a lot of times is what you expose it to. In the field of Alzheimer's, for example, the gut microbiome's relatively new discovery, not that many years ago, and there's a huge gut-brain axis. You fix your microbiome, that's very sensitive, and your microbiome's also where most of the nutrient absorption happens. And I'm not saying it happens 100% of the time that you can, improve Alzheimer's and dementia, but it's quite significant, and it's definitely something to rule out, especially early on. And I think that's why, the medical professionals that take that more whole body approach are seeing quite significant success, and they're understanding, wow, your gut microbiome's arguably, the third most important thing in your body outside of your brain and, your heart. So, but there's not as many people that understand it, and it's not really taught in most medical curriculums. So I think that'll be expanded as we move forward.
I do feel, or I do believe that I'm hearing more of that in general, looking at the entire body. And it seems like that is, even though it's not being taught now, it is a growing movement.
Yeah, I mean, my kids are in college now, and so I don't really I don't watch TV. It's a rare moon that I watch TV. And so, I read a little too much. But I've been helping a lot of people the last 5 years, just all naturally, with various medical issues and giving them good nutritional recommendations to take back the health of their body. And I've had quite a lot of success, but people are just confused why their bodies are so deprived of certain minerals or vitamins, and what caused that, because they're like, wait a second here, this is not a pharmaceutical that's making a game change result in my health here. This is all just natural stuff. And I said, well, yeah, but you got to understand the biochemistry of your body. You need these things called minerals because enzymes and proteins use them in order to function properly. So, for example, I helped somebody that they were copper deficient, and copper is a micro mineral that's actually quite significantly in low concentrations these days in the soils because of big agro, widespread use of a lot of these chelating chemicals like chloroquat, diquat, atrazine, glyphosate, and such. And so people's bodies can get very mineral deficient. And a lot of people are thinking, oh, well, I'm iron deficient. I said, well, better think about that, because iron and copper go hand in hand. So if you don't have copper, then iron gets stuck inside cells. And to make this very simplistic, your cells also have things like mitochondria that make energy, the currency, like ATP, the currency of your body. Well, it also, in addition to ATP, makes metabolic water. So I always tell my students, does like iron and water go well together? They're like, well, no. I said, well, what happens? And they're like, rust. I said, well, yeah. Do you think that's going to happen in a cell? And they're like, oh, I never thought about it like that. So I said, cellular dysfunction's a big deal. And guess what is the key that lets the iron out of the cell? Copper. And so if you don't have that micro mineral, then, of course, your serum, iron concentration could show low concentrations when in fact it may not be, but it goes back to the minerals. And years ago, we used to have people that used mineral dense salt. And I tell my students all the time, your body is made up of saline. What is saline? That's salt water, So a lot of these minerals and enzymes and proteins, and this goes back to biochemistry, they all depend on these minerals. So if you're mineral deficient and or vitamin deficient, you got a big problem, and you're going to get cellular dysfunction and consequently organ dysfunction. So, I had to help my mother take back her bladder because she had a condition known as interstitial cystitis, and she kind of became a prisoner to her house, and it's a terrible bladder disease that affects a lot of people nationwide. But she had six of the best specialists in the state of Michigan, and she's like, I got it under control. I'm like, how well is that working for you after 2 or 3 years? And she wasn't getting better. So then she's finally like, yeah, okay. What do you want me to do? I just can't live like this. Today, she's living her healthiest, best life. And she got, her body's back to normal because, the biochemistry and pathophysiology is all back the way, God intended it to be. And so she's like, this is a miracle. I said, this isn't a miracle. This is just basic nutrition. But I wish more people spoke about it, and I think it's a deficiency in medical education in this country.
It is difficult too for people without a science background to really evaluate all of the different health claims that are coming out there. What can the layperson do to understand what is legitimate versus what is just noise?
Yeah, so it's hard. I mean, because there's a certain degree of science you have to know, and we're all
Mhm.
blessed with different strengths and weaknesses. And I mean, you ask me something about, marketing and, business, my eyes glaze over and I would not, that's not my forte. But ask me to figure out a complicated, science issue, got you covered, so we all have to understand what our strengths and weaknesses are. But I always say, look to see if someone's to profit, from pushing a certain, diet or a certain, product. Look to see if there's a conflict of interest. A lot of times there are. And sadly, there's a lot of products on the market that are just junk. Like a growing trend in this country is people are using more supplements, but the laws of supplements are not the same for drugs. And so when I was helping so many people, there's so many junk supplements on the market, but I give health and wellness talks a lot of places in nutrition stores, pharmacies, and various things, just trying to educate the people about health and wellness and nutrition. um, and people don't even know what CGMP is. And I said, well, it's current good manufacturing practices, so you shouldn't buy a supplement unless you see that on the label, because that manufacturer has had to prove to the FDA that their products are free of metals, molds, microbials, and oh, it's 20 to 1. Well, you got to prove it to us that it's 20 to 1. If you don't see that, then they could have sawdust in there for all you know, and you're wasting your money. So all supplements may not even be at a therapeutic dose. They may not be, combined with the right products. And I think that's why I got so frustrated, because there's just so much junk out there and people don't know this stuff. So I was raised in a house where much is given, much is expected. So I try hard in life to educate others on, things. And I always try and make it simplistic so that people can understand. Because I really truly believe, even though some things are complicated and it's science, if you have a person that explains it a specific way, anybody can understand it, or anybody should be able to understand it. You just got to think of a different way to say it. Don't necessarily use all the lingo and the terminology that you would with somebody that understands that language, but it would just make someone not want to engage if you're using those kinds of conversations. If someone was speaking to me in German, I just would be quiet. I don't know, but
Right.
it's kind of the same analogy.
So, what are some of the most common misperceptions that you see in healthcare and wellness today?
Well, unfortunately, in this country, most allopathic doctors, they don't know anything about pharmacognosy or minerals and vitamins. They get zero educational hours in their medical school curriculum. And functional doctors, they know this stuff because they taught themselves this after medical school in their residency programs. But they don't get it. Naturopathic doctors do have quite a lot of nutritional counseling and education and look at the system as a whole. But not every state has and looks at naturopaths the same way as allopathic doctors. And a lot of people are just misinformed. They will say, well, I'll talk to my doctor about it. Well, that's kind of funny. I say that facetiously because if your doctor has had no educational training in any of this, then please tell me how they're able to answer this. My mother went back to her specialists a year later, and they're like, Linda, did we offend you? And she said, oh no. And why would you ask? And they said, well, you were our sickest patient and look at you now. And she's like, oh yeah, my daughter got me all fixed up. You weren't able to help me. So, I kind of got a little desperate, and they're like, well, what pharmaceutical did she put you on? I didn't put her on any pharmaceutical. This was all naturally. They couldn't believe it because they haven't had that kind of education in their program. So I think a lot of people sometimes take for granted and think their physician knows everything about everything. No one knows everything about everything. And they don't necessarily know what's in medical school curriculums. And most physicians consequently might say, oh, well, all that's hocus pocus. Oh, yeah. Please tell that to all the people that I've helped that have made a game change in their life. But, they just don't know.
So, thinking about your mom as an example, and I know this is kind of broad strokes, but What was the game changer for her? And is there maybe kind of a common denominator that a person should look at to improve their health?
Well, my mother, she didn't make the best choices food wise. And, so people don't understand when you eat toxic foods or chemical foods or, everything, the stuff you put on your skin, that's your largest organ, everything goes into your body, pharmaceuticals. I mean, we're talking everything. Well, then you can, your body can sometimes get toxified. You can destroy your gut microbiome and you can consequently get a lot of cellular dysfunction. So I talk a lot about cellular health in my health and wellness talks. Because if you can go back to improving cellular health, then consequently you can improve organ function. And that's how I help my mom. Um, and cells turn over constantly. So different organs, the cells turn over at a different rate. That's why your liver, for example, your liver can heal itself, but you have to remove the poison and give it the basic building blocks for it to do so. You can't continually expose your liver to the same thing. So a lot of, helping her was education at the beginning, detoxing her body and really focusing on cellular health. And consequently, she's on no pharmaceuticals today, living her best life. And she used to, feel the need to go to the washroom 150 times a day. And now she can sleep for, 8 or 9 hours without waking up. I mean, it made a game changer, benefit in her life. But it all goes back to cellular health. And they just don't talk enough about that to people because they tend to, if people watch TV, for example, Big Pharma really wants to make money. I'm not picking on them, but I get it. They want to make money, so they push their pharmaceuticals. And, we're blessed to have certain pharmaceuticals for certain ailments. But many, countries all around the world, they don't necessarily take that first approach unless you have an acute situation. If it's not an emergency situation, you might want to try and get at the root of the issue, which is what a lot of functional doctors are now trying to do along with naturopaths, instead of just pushing a pharmaceutical at somebody, because that's not working out so well. But, consequently, there's entities that are making a lot of money in doing so. So that's what I mean by conflicts of interest. And, is somebody going to gain from said thing? The real nuts and bolts of things is when your cells start to, improve their function and get back to the way they were created, then they can perform that function very well. So 80% of your immune system's in your gut. So if you have a dysfunctional gut microbiome, well, you're going to be sick a lot. You're going to create a hostile terrain, and other things that might have been able to be kept under control are going to take over. And consequently, that can lead to a lot of downstream negative health consequences.
Is that part of the difficulty in finding consistent treatments that work across the board? That is because it's so individualized. Our microbiome is so different from person to person. Does that kind of trickle down into why there's not like a single cure for cancer, for example?
Well, that's another discussion. Cancer is very multifaceted, and there's a lot of research, even especially the last 2 or 3 years, talking about some, really monumental discoveries, even in cancer research. But, cancer is a $1 trillion industry. And so there is a dark side talking about cancer that no one likes to talk about. And they would lose said $1 trillion industry if there was a cure. And I say that because there are published studies in medical professionals that are making quite significant success, but they're also being attacked consequently because of said discoveries. And so there's pros and cons to everything. And there's a whole story to why, some things happen, if you will. But I always tell people, whatever you expose your body to, there's downstream effects. A lot of people think that statins are perfectly healthy and cholesterol's bad. Well, you know what? We didn't have the dementia, Alzheimer's cases in this country until the widespread use of statins. And cholesterol, if cholesterol was the villain and so evil, okay, I mean, I lecture about this stuff all the time. Well, why would your liver make it? And secondly, there's two forms of cholesterol, not just HDL and LDL, but there's pattern A LDL, there's pattern B LDL. And the pattern B is the small, dense LDL that usually is the problem, but you get those from eating fast foods and fake foods and chemical foods. And these aren't the foods that our bodies were created to eat anyway. And then a statin, regardless of the age, will deplete coenzyme Q, and you need coenzyme Q in order for the electron transport chain in mitochondria to make ATP. So that's why fatigue is the number one side effect, from people that usually take statins. And so I try and always teach my pharmacy students this when I can, because they don't get nutrition in the main curriculum. I teach them this if they take my elective, but not everybody goes through this. And it's a simple fix, but they're not necessarily exposed to this in any mainstream curriculum.
But I mean, for me personally, just hearing more about the high fatty liver disease, that wasn't part of my vocabulary until a couple of years ago when my doctor pointed out, oh, there's something we might need to dig into a little bit deeper. And it has become part of my regular vocabulary, and finding out being genetically predisposed as well. So,
Yeah, I've helped a lot of people with fatty liver disease all naturally. And I've looked at, like, for example, I just give recommendations, but I've helped them completely looking at their fibroscan, decrease their CAP score and even their E score quite tremendously just by using all natural things that you find in nature, various herbs and minerals and vitamins that work synergistically. And basically, they did this and took these recommendations, and their physicians couldn't believe it. Literally a year later, their liver's in optimal condition. I mean, your liver's very, very important, but it also gets the brunt of attack for anything you expose your body to. But most people, I don't know everything about everything. Nobody does, but most people sadly don't understand herbal medicine, natural medicine, vitamins and minerals, because it's not a mainstream topic in medical school education in this country. And I'm saying no medical school education, regardless of whether it's PA, MD, DO training, pharmacist, nursing, whatever it is, that's not in the curriculum. And so I, give a lot of talks around to try and educate people a little bit about this, because, these things do exist in nature, and your body has an amazing ability to heal itself. You're not doomed forever, I mean, yeah, you could reach a point of no return depending upon the damage. But like, I helped this one guy that he was told to go home and get his affairs in order, and he's too old for a liver transplant. His wife thought she lost her husband that day, and he didn't really have a desire to live because he kind of lost hope. And, all I did is help him nutritionally and educate him on what herbs you can combine with what. And anyway, to make a long story short, his liver's back healthy. He's living his healthiest life. Him and his wife went on a vacation to Italy and had the best time of their life. She has her husband back, and she's like, man, like, this is so awesome. And, it's rewarding. There's nothing more rewarding in life than to help somebody else. And, if God gives me, knowledge and blessings to know how to do certain things, well, I want to help people with it. And that's just my outlook on life and what I try and do.
so for someone listening today, is there there's obviously it's a plethora of things that we do to our bodies in terms of what we're taking in. Is there one thing that you would recommend if someone wanted to make a change now to a step towards better health and better gut health and at the cellular level? What is one or two things that is easy to do now to get that step moving forward?
So the first thing I would say is try hard to take sugar out of your diet. Sugar does far more harm. Sugar is actually what will consequently destroy your body. It'll lead to insulin resistance, which is the #1 predictor of heart disease and stroke in this country, outside of it, meaning these studies have all been done, many studies to back this up. Sugar will not only destroy your body, but remember, it destroys your liver. It causes visceral fat accumulation, and it does far more harm than good. But go look at all the products that have sugar in it. You would never ever dream of giving your young child a beer, right? But how many parents push a soda and let them drink sodas all the time? I mean, in energy drinks and all these toxic food products that they shouldn't be allowing their kid to eat and consume, and yet they think nothing about it because it's socially acceptable, but yet it's extremely damaging. And so that would be one thing. And for some people that don't think sugar is addictive, I mean, these animal studies have already been done. Out of 100 mice, 99% of them were continued to go back to the sugar water versus cocaine water. It produces a greater reward effect on your brain than even cocaine. And if you don't think you're addicted, try and give it up for 21 days and let's see how well that works out, because a lot of people are addicted and don't realize it. But the more you detox yourself, and maybe start out by giving yourself 1 or 2 cheat days a week, but slowly detox, you won't even crave those foods again. When I got my mom back on the road to recovery, she didn't make those same food choices anymore because she said, I just didn't crave them anymore. I didn't feel like I wanted to eat them anymore. And that's what you kind of detoxing your body and getting certain things off will do to you. And then the second thing I would strongly suggest is throw out any table salt that's in your house. That's just 2 minerals, sodium and chloride. And buy a mineral dense salt, like a unrefined sea salt. Try and stay away from the Himalayan or maybe the Celtic salts. Third-party testings found a lot of heavy metals in those. But really look for third-party testing to make sure they're not contaminated. But a lot of the mineral dense salt is what your body needs and craves, because a lot of these enzymes and proteins use them in order to function. And if they don't have them, and so many people are mineral deficient, then bad consequences are going to result. So for example, like iodine. Iodine is, an essential nutrient that your body needs. And 98% of people are deficient because we also have so much chlorine and bromine and fluorines and so many of the products we're around that displace. I mean, all the cells in your body need iodine, every single one, not just your thyroid. And if you have a glandular tissue, like breast tissue, prostate, ovarian, thyroid, pancreatic, like these things suck it up even more like a sponge. So I was given a health and wellness talk one time, and I passed around some Q-tips and Lugol's, and I said, yeah, do the skin patch and put a spot on your skin that should last for 24 hours. And it gives you a rough idea how deficient you are. I mean, there's people that didn't even make it out of the health talk, and it's completely gone on their skin. They're showing their body's severely deficient. So there's great functional medicine. Actually, he started out as an allopathic doctor, but now he's more of a functional medicine doctor, like Dr. Brownstein. He's written many books about iodine. He's a functional doctor out of Detroit area, but he's on YouTube. Go watch him. I mean, he talked about even taking a lady that had fibrocystic breast cancer, was given a month to live. She came into his clinic, and he found out, she was severely iodine deficient. And to make a long story short, he was able to give her about 5.5 years more of life instead of that 1 month. but, he was also trained by the pioneer of iodine medicine, Dr. Abraham out of UCLA Medicine. And so, not everybody has that luxury of being able to train, but he understands the importance of these minerals and how they work together in unison in order to perform basic bodily functions. And that's how he's able to, help a lot of his patients in his clinics. So, people don't necessarily talk about minerals in this country, but it's a big deal. And I think that would be my second choice.
Are there over-the-counter testing options for that, or is that something you'd have to go through a primary care physician?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people will say, "Oh, Tracy, I asked my doctor to run the full gamut of tests." Well, that's laughable because the full gamut of tests doesn't test for everything. And so sometimes you have to specifically ask for certain things. And please tell me like how the average Joe would know this, because, a lot of the people I work with, they're like, "Well, how would I know that, Tracy, to ask for an advanced lipid panel, and why would I know to ask for this?" And that's where I think education is lacking in this country. And we need to, fix that gap and move forward and, help the people in our country. That's why we have people in this country that have huge reactions to our genetically modified flour. And so they're on all these diets of gluten-free, which is a whole nother issue, because it's not necessarily healthy. But, they can go to Italy and they can eat all the bread and pasta that they want with no issues whatsoever. But Italy has one of the, world's highest food standards, and they don't allow, genetically modified organisms in their diet, and they, have very high food standards. But, why doesn't everybody, and that's why I always go back to, well, who wants to sign up to have toxic food? Well, I don't think anybody does. But, consequently, it goes back to the building blocks. If you're not providing the basic building blocks for your body, well, your body can't perform the way it was designed to perform. And so, that's why I gave you some of the suggestions I did.
Mhm.
Well, I think
Yeah.
we really have gotten to the end of our question list and beyond. You have
Mhm.
been really great to have a conversation with you. And we want to make sure before we drop off that there isn't anything more, or there isn't anything that we didn't ask. Is there anything for our audience that you want to throw out there?
I just want to encourage people. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. And even though, like, building on something you said, well, what about the people that may not necessarily have that strength in science? You have a strength in something. You are blessed with something. Figure out what that strength is and try and make a positive impact and imprint on humanity to use the strength that you are blessed with. Because, yeah, I mean, I may know something on this topic, but you may know something much more on a different topic that consequently can leave such a lasting imprint and impression. And I always call it like the ripple effect. So, we come in contact with so many people throughout our day-to-day lives, and you never know who you talk to, what just a simple kindness or a compliment or, anything, a suggestion might do in their life. But consequently, you help them or you educate them or you do whatever, is your strength. Well, that creates a ripple, and then they go and help other people. And then, so that one act could end up, consequently helping 300 or 500 people. That's amazing, and we all should be mindful of what strengths we're blessed with and try and think of ways that we can help humanity. And I think the world would be a better place.
Well, it's very obvious you found your strength. So thank you very much.
Of course. Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to Can I Get a Retake, a podcast by Great River Learning. If you liked the episode, show your support by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit greatriverlearning.com. Can I Get a Retake is brought to you by hosts Michelle Manaman and Deanna Plussel. Our show is produced and edited by Michaela Albee and Maggie Christensen. Artwork for the podcast is crafted by Michelle Manaman. Our intro music is courtesy of Comma Media. We'll be back soon with another captivating chat with a top GRL educator.